All right, so we're going to dive into The Doctor and the Devils. This film review that you sent over is wild. Talk about
Wow.
morally gray areas. You've got a brilliant anatomist in 19th century Edinburgh, a thirst for knowledge, and a couple of opportunistic grave robbers. It's kind of giving me Frankenstein vibes, but with a historical twist.
It's interesting that you mentioned Frankenstein. Both that story and The Doctor and the Devils kind of grapple with the same idea. Ambition pushing the boundaries of what's ethically acceptable.
Yeah.
In the film, Dr. Rock isn't out there digging up graves himself, but he's certainly benefiting from Fallon and Broom's, shall we say, entrepreneurial spirit. The film definitely doesn't shy away from showing how their actions blur the lines between scientific pursuit and moral corruption.
Yeah, the reviewer makes it clear that this isn't your typical horror flick. Fallon and Broom, the guys supplying the bodies, aren't just like background creeps. They're portrayed as complex characters.
Chilling, yeah, but with a twisted charm. That's some seriously skilled acting, right? Especially when you consider that these characters were based on real people. Oh, absolutely. The Burke and Hare murders shocked Edinburgh back in the day, and the film definitely taps into that real-life horror. What's fascinating here is how the filmmakers use those historical events to explore the ethical dilemmas of the time.
Mhm.
It really makes you wonder, if you were a doctor desperate for cadavers to advance medical knowledge, where would you draw the line?
Okay, let's talk about the visuals for a sec. The review paints this incredibly atmospheric picture, gothic, eerie, claustrophobic. You really get the sense that the film's look is just as important as the dialogue.
Yeah, the reviewer raves about the director, Freddie, and how his background as a cinematographer is evident in every shot. Think deep shadows, stark contrasts, and those classic gothic horror elements. It's not just about creating a spooky vibe, though. Those visuals actually reinforce the film's exploration of morality and corruption.
You're right. The reviewer calls out those themes specifically. It's like the film is asking, can we achieve scientific progress without some moral compromise? It doesn't seem like the film gives easy answers, and I'm guessing that's where the reviewer's comment about all the heavy dialogue comes in.
Exactly. The film is full of philosophical discussions and moral debates, which might not be for everyone. Some horror fans crave jump scares and gore, but The Doctor and the Devils seems to prioritize these complex ethical conversations.
But the performances sound incredible. The reviewer seems really impressed with Timothy Dalton as Dr. Rock. He's got that classic intensity, right? Perfect for a character grappling with ambition and moral boundaries.
Yeah, Dalton seems to nail that duality. The reviewer also praises Jonathan Pryce and Stephen Rea, who play Fallon and Broom. They managed to make these morally reprehensible characters somehow captivating, which isn't easy. But remember, the reviewer does have some criticisms. Even with great performances, a bad script can really sink a film. You know what I mean? The reviewer did point out some pacing issues and felt like a few of the supporting characters, like that brothel worker played by Twiggy, weren't very developed. But they still gave it 4 out of 5 stars, so it's clearly doing something right.
Let's dig into that something, right? It feels like this movie goes way beyond your typical good versus evil thing, you know? It's like they took a real historical event, the Burke and Hare murders, to explore this ethical mess of 19th century medical research. What was Edinburgh like back then? What made it such a hotbed for that kind of activity?
Edinburgh in the 1800s was a city of extremes, really.
Yeah.
You had all this groundbreaking medical advancement happening alongside rampant poverty and a total lack of sanitation.
Yeah.
It was a time when the study of anatomy was exploding, but the only legal way to get a body to dissect was if it belonged to an executed criminal.
So there was this huge demand for cadavers, but the legal supply was super limited. Yeah, I can definitely see how that'd create like the perfect conditions for a black market to pop up. It's like prohibition, but for bodies.
Exactly. And that's where these resurrection men, or body snatchers, came in. They were robbing graves all over the place to feed the needs of anatomists. It was a pretty grim business, and it really set the stage for Burke and Hare's whole gruesome thing.
And this is where it gets really creepy. These guys weren't content with just robbing graves. They started murdering people to supply Dr. Robert Knox, who was a prominent anatomist at the time. A respected doctor knowingly buying bodies from murderers. That's insane.
Yeah, it's a dark chapter in medical history. Knox was never charged, but his reputation was ruined. Burke was hanged for his crimes, while Hare, that rat, turned king's evidence and got to walk free. The whole thing really exposed the underbelly of scientific progress and how easily ethical boundaries can be crossed when ambition takes over.
And that seems to be what The Doctor and the Devils is really grappling with, right? It takes this historical horror and turns it into fiction to explore ambition, morality, and the price of progress.
Yeah, the film definitely doesn't shy away from those uncomfortable questions. It makes you think about the compromises that people make, even those with good intentions, when they're chasing knowledge. Like, is any advancement worth sacrificing your morals? It's tough. The film doesn't give you a clear answer, but it definitely makes you think.
That's the sign of a good film, don't you think? When it sticks with you even after it's over. And it's not just the story. The reviewer kept mentioning the visuals, that gothic atmosphere. What do you think that adds to the overall message?
Well, gothic horror has always been obsessed with the darker side of human nature, the things we try to bury or ignore, And in this film, it's not just about spooky visuals. It's like the shadows and that feeling of claustrophobia are reflecting the ethical darkness at the heart of the story.
So the genre itself becomes a metaphor for the moral shadows lurking beneath scientific progress. It makes you wonder, are we still dealing with these same ethical dilemmas today, just in different forms?
That's exactly the question the film seems to be asking us. Think about things like advancements in gene editing, artificial intelligence, even something like social media algorithms. Are we really considering the ethical implications of these innovations? Or are we repeating the same mistakes of the past, just with a shiny new coat of paint?
That's a pretty sobering thought. We tend to celebrate scientific breakthroughs, but we don't often stop and ask at what cost. The Doctor and the Devils forces us to confront that uncomfortable truth.
And it does it by using a fictionalized account of a real historical event. That mix of fact and fiction adds a whole other layer of complexity, making the film's message hit even harder. It's not just about 19th century Edinburgh, it's about us, right here, right now, and the choices we're making in the name of progress.
Let's take a pause here before we go into the final part of our deep dive. We've talked about the plot, the characters, the historical stuff, and all the big ethical questions the film brings up, but we still need to talk about some of the criticisms from the review.
Yes, let's go back to those pacing issues and see if we can understand why the reviewer felt some parts of the film were lacking, even though they still praised the overall message.
All right, when we get back, we'll get into those critiques and explore what The Doctor and the Devils might have missed, even with its ambition and intellectual depth. So stay tuned. Okay, welcome back to our deep dive on The Doctor and the Devils. We've talked about a lot, from the film's, kind of disturbing plot to the true events that inspired it. It definitely makes you think. But before we finish up, let's talk about some of those criticisms that the reviewer had. They mentioned some issues with the pacing and thought some characters could have been explored more fully.
Yeah, the reviewer felt like the film sometimes got a little too bogged down in all the philosophical stuff. They said some scenes could have been tighter, maybe giving more space for visuals instead of just relying on dialogue all the time.
Right, it's about finding that balance, delivering a message that makes you think without losing the momentum of the story. Do you think maybe that's where the criticism about the characters comes in? Like maybe because they were so focused on the ethical debate that they missed opportunities to really flesh out the supporting characters?
Possibly. The reviewer specifically mentioned Jenny, that brothel worker played by Twiggy. Her storyline, and a few others, felt kind of secondary to Dr. Rock and his whole ethical struggle. Like, what if those characters had been given more space, more depth? We might have gotten an even better picture of 19th century Edinburgh and all the moral complexities of the time.
I see what you mean. It's like the supporting characters could have given us different angles on the main question of the film. How far is too far when it comes to pursuing knowledge? Makes you wonder, were these deliberate choices by the filmmakers? Or were they limited by the script or budget?
That's the thing with filmmaking, right? Sometimes you have creative choices based on practical stuff. Yeah. But even with those criticisms, the reviewer still gave the movie 4 out of 5 stars. So clearly it resonated with them.
It's definitely resonating with me. This whole deep dive has really opened my eyes to how scientific progress and ethical dilemmas go hand in hand, Makes you wonder, are we really any different today? Are we still making those compromises just with fancier tech?
That's what The Doctor and the Devils makes us think about. It's a historical thriller, for sure, but it's also holding up a mirror to us in the present. Are we pushing the boundaries of science without really understanding what we might be sacrificing? Think about stuff like gene editing, artificial intelligence, even those algorithms on social media. Are we just creating our own versions of Dr. Rock, blinded by ambition and the idea of progress?
Wow, that's a lot to think about. I think this deep dive has given everyone listening some serious food for thought. The Doctor and the Devils is more than just a horror movie. It's like a warning. It reminds us that every step forward in knowledge comes with the responsibility of thinking about the ethical consequences. So next time you hear about some amazing new discovery, ask yourself, at what cost? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep learning.